Hi, this is Matt from Mews. Today we're joined by Eric from Oki.
Hi everybody, good to be here in the Mews office in Prague.
And also hi, Richard.
Hi there.
So Richard's the founder of Mews, I'm the CEO, and Eric is the CEO and founder of Oki. And today we want to talk about OTAs and kind of looking at the investments they've made in startups over the last few years. Is that a trend? Is that something that's going to stay? Is it a reason that they're trying to diversify their business? And are there startups that are trying to become the OTAs? Because there's a lot of things here. So I think we have a lot to say, but we'll see that by the end of the call if that's true. Maybe we'll be done in 3 minutes, I guess. So I guess the biggest OTA, the big blue, Booking.com, they made a few investments over the years in startups that they have fully acquired. So I think the first real one that I remember is Hotel Ninjas. Do you remember that one? Mm-hmm. So that was I think it was a PMS company or an early stage PMS company from Spain that they acquired.
How long ago was this?
It was when Mews just started 5 years ago, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't think anything was remaining of that product. So they acquired this company. I think at that time, Booking was looking to get access to that hotel data, which is extremely powerful for an OTA, because if you suddenly get access to the data of Expedia and any of the other OTAs that you don't get access to naturally as an OTA, I think it's an interesting play, but it clearly didn't work out because what I understand is that there's one guy remaining of the original team in the company, and that product's been axed entirely. So it's interesting.
I think it was something that we used to be really, really worried about, but I think as far as I remember, it was something that they built on top of Salesforce, which I think is in itself a kind of interesting play.
Yeah, I remember actually our worries in our early days because we were so young and we were like, oh shit, now Booking has a PMS company and they've got the scalability to go after the whole world. Yeah. And that never actually played out. Yeah. But, it's still something that if there's someone in the industry that could scale up a PMS in the cloud, I think it would be one of the big OTAs.
Yeah. I do think that strategy has kind of led to both Booking and Expedia diversifying their strategy. So basically not putting their eggs in one basket, thinking that we will buy the only, the best new startup, basically, or the best new little thing that will just become to define the best PMS in the market. I think they've basically diversified it. So I think there's definitely tools that they kind of work with and interact with. But I think both Priceline or Booking.com and Expedia are trying out different versions of basically these kind of B2B tools. And I think it's going to come down to, a strategy of them creating certain tools, buying certain tools that will be part of their extranet, and then the other is basically this kind of marketplace strategy that I think everyone seems to be developing in every little way.
Yeah. I keep getting this email, maybe Eric, you get this email as well, from Booking.com saying join our startup Accelerator and then you get 50,000 euros or something invested.
Yeah, I don't know. I heard about it, but that was something about being what was it? Friendly, like eco-friendly or something like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's
We didn't participate.
Yeah, but it's I guess geared towards getting startups to build something on top of their platform that then becomes a marketplace where you can purchase their products.
Because it's both Expedia and Booking.com have these kind of startup innovation hubs, and I think that I guess it is a good strategy because there are. With the pace and evolution of change, there's going to be different distribution models. Yeah. Some of them are going to work, some of them may not work entirely, but there's a lot of money in the ecosystem now that I think is really, really interesting. And I think it's also at some point, we keep on talking about, Amazon, Google, Alibaba, when are they actually really going to kind of make a concerted push into travel? And I think, again, that will kind of launch an acquisition spree as well within the travel ecosystem as well. So, and then you have all of these kind of distribution, let's say, players, like, for example, Winding Tree. I think that's one that causes quite a lot of excitement within the industry, whether it's kind of negative or positive. And I think that'll be interesting to see just how how with basically supply coming in, whether demand will actually kind of follow that as well.
I think, like, speaking from a guest-facing startup, we need to look at the OTAs just like the hotels do. Huge channels with enormous potential, and I think we need to find creative ways to understand how we add value to them so that we can actually hook up onto their channels and make use of their distribution.
Yeah.
But also be very open to Winding Tree and new opportunities coming. Because the OTAs have, like, what challenges do they have? So they are sitting on a high commission model, but they need to make sure for their stakeholders that they make a lot more money in the coming 5 years.
Yeah.
They can do that by adding new revenue streams, by becoming more sticky. How do they do that? Well, they follow the guest into the stay on property, learn more about the guest, and hotels cannot live without them. But they can probably, I mean, they need to find a way, right? How can Priceline beat Expedia and vice versa?
So
what challenges do you think they have?
So if you look at the OTAs and what they've acquired in terms of companies, which is the one that you are most excited about or think was the best acquisition that they did?
I think probably Price Match was a good play on Booking.com because they could say to their hotels, here we have a way for you guys to easily manage your rates better, and in retrospect, if they manage their rates better, they're going to sell them at higher rates, which in the end equals to higher commission for Booking.com.
Yeah,
So
but
that's a super
what's
nice
funny
win-win.
on Price Match is that we had an early integration with the guys because we absolutely loved the young company Price Match revenue management, and then they were merged into Booking. And we felt that the hotels were really hesitant to allow Booking to get access to the data. As much as they've said we separated entirely, hotels were just hesitant. And today we don't have anyone remaining on that connection. And we actually removed it from the system because, people are just really worried about giving their data to the biggest OTA.
But I think it's not about giving data. You need to just figure out what data are you sharing, because it's a
yield system. You share everything.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
I don't know that much about our methods. So you share absolutely
You
everything.
share all the reservation data, the revenue attached to the reservations. So it's a lot of data, right? So you can strip out the personal data, but still you really know which channels are being booked at which hotel, the availability per channel, right? So Booking suddenly knows, hey, Expedia gets more rooms. So I would be hesitant if I get 50% of my business from Booking, and then them getting insight that I'm giving other OTAs or my own website more availability. That's worrisome for a company like Booking.com, I guess.
But Expedia also provides like rate management and these kind of tools.
Yeah.
So are there hotels that are using both the service from Booking and Expedia, you think?
I think it's. I think with Expedia, they provide revenue management based on what you're producing on Expedia. It isn't that they basically do a two-way connect into the PMS. But I think that's where, for example, I find that Expedia's strategy much more cohesive, basically, in the way that they get. I think, for example, in terms of as far as acquisitions go, I think both HomeAway and someone like Trivago, those have been really smart acquisitions by Expedia because they basically can now almost kind of outsource some of this other stuff. So, for example, Trivago buying Base 7 Booking, that's an interesting play because that's a PMS. They can basically try going with Base 7 Booking, try and basically see if that works. Then, for example, Expedia buying Alice now, that basically it's like trying the guest management kind of app and then then it's much easier as well for them to kind of because Expedia will do loads of integrations to lots of different PMSs, so maybe that's a way to completely remove the need for a one of the big guys basically to actually own a PMS in the first place. Yeah. So I think it.
What do you mean? Because they get the reservations via Expedia, and then they have a way to handle them.
Well, they get basically all of the information. It's like Price Match, right? They get all of the information about all of the reservations coming in. With someone like Alice, they also get some of the more behavioural information about what the guest is actually doing, what kind of services they'd be looking for. And if you look at kind of, I guess, Expedia's wider play, which is essentially still trying to be this kind of all-encompassing travel agency, I think that's really kind of interesting because they basically want to own the customer journey from the moment that you kind of make, from the moment that you start booking your booking your trip to the moment that you basically start looking to book your trip again.
Yeah, exactly. The whole discovery phase.
Yeah, and if they have 20 startups that they own in that kind of space, I think that's going to be really, really interesting.
Yeah. And if you so these are Expedia, Booking, they're the biggest OTAs, but then there was an interesting investment in Germany by the largest German, I think they're still one of the larger ones, but they are quickly losing share. Like they're called HRS, and they invested, or I'm not sure if they acquired the company called Konichi, which is I think a beacon-based check-in app. So is that a ploy to diversify their business because they're struggling so much on the OTA side, or?
I think it's a way for them to make sure they control the value they can add towards their business reservations.
Yeah.
I met the founder of Konichi 2 days ago, and he explained it like it's a way for them to completely streamline the processes and the pain points in the customer journey for a business traveler. And if HRS can say, hey, we have a better business guest experience if you book via HRS, that's probably really good for them.
No, that is actually clever.
It's a loyalty scheme for HRS, essentially. It's
but in value, not in like maybe...
Yeah, and I think it like totally makes sense because if you're, I don't know, IBM or something like that, and you just, you want to say, this is the product that we want to give to all of our employees, and it means that basically the employee can set which room they want in the hotel, all of these kind of different things, and they have a seamless experience. That's a great product
But if you think about it, like actually when you say it like that, it is very clever because HRS has been struggling to compete against the big two OTAs, but they were always winning in the business segment of corporate rates. And if this facilitates that piece of their business, this is actually strengthening the OTA business, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because we have these huge OTAs, Turkish OTA for Turkish hotel guests, and these kind of OTAs still work and go really well for these niche markets that are still like big enough to be interesting.
Yeah.
So there is definitely value in. But if you want to beat Booking and Expedia, then you need to play on some niche, which is then big enough, and then be really, really good at it.
Yeah.
That could still work.
So Eric and I, we were at the .com hotel conference here in Prague yesterday, and we were on stage with a company called Handy, which is growing really rapidly. And he said something, and I don't know if you picked this up, but in his talk, he was alluding to them becoming an OTA, and I don't know if you picked that up in this, what he said?
Yeah, what he said was basically that every person that has used a Handy is basically it's like Handy is a reason for visiting a hotel. It's just like Konichi is a reason for booking by HRS if you're a business traveler. They like the Handy experience, so they would like to experience Handy again in a hotel. And for that reason, he said they had like 1 million travelers that they could untap the resources from and say, hey, put your hotel on this platform.
It makes sense because they raised humongous amounts of money. I don't know if you remember how much.
30 million or something like that.
Yeah. So and for me the ploy of putting mobile phones in rooms wasn't very exciting. But if they are making that OTA ploy, then it becomes, I guess, interesting. But if they can,
I think that's an interesting play because I think it's a way. I'm not sure who the company is, whether it's like Xiaomi or something like that. But it's essentially it's in a way it's a distribution ploy by a telecommunications company or by a telephone handset maker, basically, to actually kind of gain this kind of market share basically in the distribution. And I think that again kind of brings it back to, right now we're talking about Expedia and Booking.com. They don't own all the customers in the world basically. And I think that's where it'll be interesting, a few years down the line when we're kind of talking about what's Facebook's strategy, what's Amazon's strategy, what's Alibaba's strategy, what's Google's strategy, because I think they're able to talk to a much bigger silo of customers. And still, I think the biggest weakness in the Booking.com and Expedia model is in the fact that they basically still have to rely on Google to actually fund their traffic. I think probably Expedia to a lesser extent because I think they're a little bit kind of stickier. But if you look at the revenue growth of Priceline or of Booking.com itself, I think Booking.com has always been much better at generating more revenues for hotels, being more aggressive in their kind of growth. So I think all of those are very, very interesting plays. And
I remember in our early days we went to Amsterdam and there was Whip who was doing really cool websites, and then we ran into this company called Boutique. And we were so excited. We went to that office and we're like, oh, this is such a cool company. And we walked away from there thinking this is going to be the next hotel website building company that really gets it, that can help convert. And then a few weeks later, they were scooped up by Booking.com. And I've never run into, I think we have one hotel that is still running a boutique website. But I feel that company could have achieved so much more if the OTA hadn't stepped in. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I don't know. This is probably, but it feels that every single startup that's been acquired by the OTAs has kind of done worse.
Yeah.
And become a worse product, basically. And I don't know whether that's to do with the founders not really being hungry. Like, for example, Booking.com is the perfect case of that not happening. So Booking.com became an insanely amazing company after Priceline acquired it. I mean, they were already amazing then, but then basically became a much, much better one. And I think it was because they were still kind of kept separate and still managed to retain their brand. So, for example, you look at Alice, they're still a strong brand. They're still building on that brand, even though they're now totally part of Expedia. And I think So
do you think that if Boutique had retained their boutique branding and be kept as a standalone unit, even though they may have been owned by Booking, they would have been more successful?
I suspect so.
I also, I think what the OTAs need to do, and this is also, I think there's a bit of a misconception because hotels have this complete hate-love relationship and they're completely terrified about the OTAs, but they still really love them because they bring so much business. But what the OTAs want to do is they just want their hotels to be really successful because then they will love them more, right?
Yeah.
So this is a way of doing that. I think it's better for them to have stake in companies but let them be run by the founders.
Yeah.
Because then there's still that branding side of things where they can just, love the founders and why they are doing their business. Yeah. And still see that, okay, it's backed by a huge company like one of these OTAs, which gives us that distribution channel or at least the power of scale. I know that, if Boutique, for example, can hook up to the scale and the API of the content, they can probably build a website in a couple of seconds compared to a week or whatever. Yeah. So that's huge in amount in sense, and that's just basically getting value out to the customers faster.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So we get asked the question often because we're always in fundraising rounds because we're a very fast growing company, and there's always the question, would you sell to Booking.com or would you sell to Expedia? And I think we are always super hesitant, and we're like, no, look, we'd never want to be acquired by an OTA, and then we would be like, we'd much rather look at Apple or Google or Amazon as companies that are not big in the hospitality industry, but they.
Why is that then?
Because they excite us as companies.
Yeah.
I think they
Why
do
they
something.
Because of the data. I think if you look at what you could do with, because I guess I think for me one of the most annoying things about the OTAs is still the fact that essentially there is an inherently predatory aspect of OTAs. There's basically, and it's not hotelier friendly in that kind of way. And I think it's sometimes unfair, because it's just, you look at it from an OTA's, from a hotelier's perspective. You think I'm here working my butt off 24 hours a day, and I, try and make my hotel the best possible hotel it is. And then, I'm doing all of these things in my own personal kind of worldview and purview. And essentially, then there's this one company that I have to, give away 25% of my revenue for essentially the fact that they just bring me all of these kind of people. And I guess on one side it's great because I essentially don't really need a sales department anymore, and they just fill up my rooms. And if I'm doing a fairly good enough job, I mean, what's 25% between friends, but it's inherently that you're kind of there and you feel that they don't understand you. And I think it's also in the tools that traditionally Booking.com or Expedia have always created. They've been there to help Booking.com and Expedia and not the hotelier. They haven't made things that much easier for the hotelier, and still, if you look at, for example, the slickness of the product versus the slickness of the extranet, it's very clear. What their kind of particular focus is. It's basically in the same way that the hotel might look very, very shiny on the outside, but you don't want to go into any of the staff areas, and that's basically what it looks like from an OTA perspective. And I think you really, really feel it, and I think that's probably the reason why somebody looking at it from a total point of view, how can you make the hotel industry be better as generally a service provider, basically. I think that's something that the OTAs still lack. And they don't really have a passion for it, basically, or it seems.
But that is what they're trying to solve with these cool startups that are niched, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yesterday at the .com conference, Jens, the founder of Pace, revenue management system, they were talking about, I'm not going to go into Winding Tree, also don't quite understand how it works. You will have a separate podcast.
Yeah, I think cryptocurrency and it is difficult, and I think it needs 20 minutes to get through that.
But he brought up an interesting thing. It's like, okay, if they're able to decentralize the whole distribution thing, hotels still needs to find how they can find Hotel Pashto Palace in Prague. Like, how are they going to find these people? And that's still where they solve an enormous problem. But it is really interesting what you said, that Google is completely controlling their business model, because that's
them. For example, they're doing really, really interesting stuff with airlines at the moment. Oh. So, and I think the API that they're kind of pushing out is really, really interesting from that perspective, basically. So, they're doing a lot of, I guess, machine learning that you can actually take out from their API. So you can, for example, now see whether there's a high chance that a flight will be delayed, which is great for certain types of startups, basically, in that kind of space, because essentially they're doing the kind of the heavy lifting of, let's say, user travel management. So someone like Get Your Guide can really expand their product offering by using a Google API from that perspective. And because they have an active model for essentially how to use that API, that becomes really, really interesting.
Because Amazon did a trial, I think it was last year or 2 years ago, with hotels, like an OTA trial, but I think they actually stopped that relatively quickly. No,
it's difficult for them.
Trying to do
becoming an OTA. I think
from the Amazon shop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because the thing is, Amazon is probably one of the few companies that doesn't need to completely rely on Google for the traffic.
Yeah.
So basically, you go to Amazon and you search for things. And you know that's basically a transaction. It's a transaction website, basically. You want to do a transaction, you go to Amazon. And so for them, it makes sense for them to be the e-commerce platform for everything on the planet. So if they can add travel to that, then that's also really exciting for, because if in some ways, if you look at, for example, the book world, and the challenges with distribution there, versus, for example, the hotel world, that's really similar. You had the way that they create, destroyed borders and those kind of guys, basically. I mean, that's basically the same, that's what I'd be really, really worried about from Booking's perspective. So I almost kind of think that, the reason why Booking spends so much money on Google is essentially to kind of stop them from really going after this product, because they know that they'll at least lose this kind of revenue stream from Booking.com. So it's essentially kind of it's racketeering, basically, in one sense. It's paying off that guy from not developing this kind of product. And whether that's Google or whether it's going to be Amazon, I think that's going to be a really, really interesting play. But I think, going back to the distribution, it's again interesting from the point of view of, the main thing that the OTAs still have is basically the supply. And I think that's where it's really interesting for someone like Winding Tree. If they can get a scale of supply, then perhaps demand might not be that difficult, because there'll be companies out there that will want to kind of actually go into that. So it then basically makes, I guess, Google's job or Amazon's job much easier, because there's a distribution network like Winding Tree that's already done most of their work basically for them, and they don't need to go out to every single hotel in the world because there's a distribution platform that's actually kind of done this.
Are there other, like you mentioned, books? Are there other industries that saw like where the trends in distribution have gone similarly, and which we could consider being further ahead than the hotel industry is today? So that we could look at and try to see where we.
I think it's basically, you look at one of the things that I think is amazing about disintermediation.
What did you call it?
Disintermediation.
I have to Google that one.
No, but I guess it's basically cutting out the middleman.
Okay.
You know, it's like there's been loads of different industries that used to have a very, very high commission margin, and then certain startups like Amazon, like Google or whoever have been able to kind of actually propose, look, we're going to give you a tiny commission. I think you can probably say it's the one that's almost easiest to look at is, for example, Airbnb. I mean, one of the successes of Airbnb has been in the customer experience, and they've been really, really great at creating a great brand. But I think also the fact that they started out with very low commissions for that space, lower than someone like HomeAway, even still to this day, that drives that company forward. And I think a lot of, with Airbnb now looking to becoming an OTA as well, and kind of making more and more pushes into the hotel space, I think that's actually quite an interesting one as well.
Because I heard they're now approaching hotels to get their inventory directly on Airbnb, which is the opposite of what Airbnb stands for, which is really personal, in a personal home, and suddenly now they're taking that inventory from a hotel.
But I don't think that's, like, if you look at, for example, some of the boutique hotels.
Yeah, exactly. That is personal too.
That's personal too, and that's like,
Yeah, but you wouldn't go onto Airbnb to go book a boutique hotel. You go on Airbnb for the specific purpose of booking into a local's home, right?
Why not a suite? For example, like a really, really special suite in a hotel, and I think I
go to Airbnb
hotels
because I get a better deal than I get in a hotel if the city is fully booked. So then those suites will go at a premium usually.
But if you look at it from it's the thing that what was that company? Room 7 Booking or
No, that's Base 7.
No. It was something.
What did they do?
So they basically wanted you to book rooms directly within hotels.
Yes, this was a few years ago.
Yeah, and so they wanted you to see the hotel room perfectly.
The actual room.
So you as a hotel, you give your inventory for that particular room to them, and they would sell it. Like, clearly it hasn't worked out because we haven't heard from them.
No, but
it's an interesting concept.
For a distribution platform like Airbnb, it makes sense because you're basically saying, look, we're not trying to sell you the kind of standard room. You can go to the OTAs for that. Yeah. But if you want these kind of special rooms, almost like the showrooms of those hotels, that's actually something that Airbnb will give you. And
but they have to fix their distribution. Like the biggest complaint from hotels is that I have to manually go in there and upload it, and until they fix that, I don't think they will get picked up by all major hotels because it's just too much manual effort.
But I think in the case of Airbnb, there's a reason for that friction, which is basically they want people to make the home front on Airbnb to be as nice as possible.
Yeah.
And if you look at, for example, like the struggle that Airbnb Booking.com and Expedia have is basically that hotels always just make such a bad, that's why they've had to force you to kind of get better photos, do better things, because hotels are so bad at, creating that kind of personal space within the OTAs. And I think Airbnb has always done that very, very well by making sure that people spend a lot of time trying to kind of fix up that particular microsite, basically.
That is an interesting thing. We use a lot of content for our hotels, of course, and for example, beautiful photos convert so much more than crappy photos. It's obvious, but it's surprising how big the difference is.
Groundbreaking.
But the cool thing is, when we set up a hotel, it's very often that Booking.com has much more beautiful pictures than the hotel's own website, which is also, it's a decision, but I guess it's Booking.com investing in this and just seeing this is much more better for our business.
Which is why I
But,
don't understand.
but it also comes down to the terrible websites that the hotel have, and they created that website at the moment the hotel opened or when it was built, and then never touched it again. But photos get taken throughout, but they don't know how to upload them because they don't own the website. It's done through a third-party marketing agency. And like your own website should have more content that's more relevant with more pictures than on a Booking.com if you really want to get some business direct.
And you want to basically constantly change it. You constantly put in, what does it look like in spring if we're now coming into spring? What will it look like in summer? It's like things like that are relevant for the consumer, gives them much more clarity. But essentially for most hotels, it's really difficult to try and upload that kind of content.
So to round off the discussion, so clearly OTA have invested a lot into startups, but what's going to be the next startup investment that's going to happen? Because they usually come as a surprise. But are there startups that we are excited about that it's not necessarily a negative thing if you get invested. It's great sometimes that an OTA will kickstart a startup. But what are some of the startups that you guys are excited about?
I think the whole marketplace scenario is really, really interesting. And I think that is, if you look at, for example, Snapshot, what they've been trying to do. So I guess that's part of Shiji, which you can kind of say has, an adjacent link to Alibaba. So that might be a distribution or, some way of that, basically that tangent kind of working. I think, for example, the guys at Impaler are really, really interesting. And I think if you look at what they could do...
But what do they do? So
they're essentially trying to do a universal API for the hotel industry. So I think they're essentially trying to create a universal API which will host its own marketplace in the future.
Like a Zapier? Or
like a Zapier, essentially.
Okay.
And then...
like to all the hoteliers listening to this, for us, Oki as a provider, there are awesome PMSs like Mews where we literally connect in like a minute.
Yeah.
And there are PMSs where it takes months and costs a lot of money. What Impala is doing is solving this connection problem. So we connect to their hub and they do all the annoying connections. So it saves time. We don't have a lot of friction on our developers.
If you are struggling with building those connections, aren't they going to struggle with that equally much?
Yeah, but that will be their core business. Yeah. So they should do a good job there if they pull it off.
Fair.
But then
over the years, we've heard about so many third parties that are trying to come in between, and I've yet to see one that's taken over the world. I'd love for Impala to succeed because it will solve problems for us as well. But it's not the first time that I've heard this play. It
is the first time I see a very professional company trying to do it, though.
Yeah.
I've come across
been doing it.
Yeah, okay, that's true. But I'm thinking about other ones that I'm not going to mention.
So, Eric, any other startups that you are excited about right now?
I think it was really cool to see Jens talking about Pace, the new revenue management system, in the sense that what they're doing is they're taking the same intelligence that the big boys have, like ideas, for example, but making it easy. And I think that's the whole thing. A successful startup in our industry has to realize that, no offense, hoteliers have a lot of things on their mind, and if we don't automate and make things so easy that they can do stuff with one click, then you can never succeed in our business. Like, you have a company which is enormous, which is called STR Global, and what they do is they just send one freaking report. That's basically their whole business.
And I don't know if you've ever tried to upload data into their platform, and I used to in a hotel. It is atrocious there. It's like a glorified Excel sheet, but it just doesn't work as good as Excel. But it's tough because every morning you have to go in and you have to upload your RevPAR and your rates, etc.
But the value in getting that report is just the ease, right? And I think a successful startup, and that's what I like so much about Pace, is because they can then do the same things like the giants, but in a much, much easier way, no manuals, and of course the whole SaaS models that are coming up, which makes clipping on and on much easier.
For example, like why you look at a company that does a really good standard product that's not complicated, being able to scale like OTA Insight, for example. Definitely. And I think they've been an amazing success.
I did not expect that they were going to do as well as they did. I love the guys; they're so great. But I thought, okay, this is just a tool that gives me competitor rates. But clearly, there's a need for that in the industry. It's the first step towards real revenue management. And we see it in our hotels. I think it's about 4 or 5% of our hotels that have a full two-way connected revenue management system, which is shockingly low. But they are really a great middle way to get to full revenue management. So,
but they are just such nice people, and they tell a good story.
Well, like you are, right? We always like to recommend Barrett because you make us look good, and it's the same with the OTA guys.
No, but they tell a really good story, and like you can have two products that do the same, but the person that can tell an awesome, interesting story around it.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's what they do. Like I remember we were in Stockholm at Hotel Market Seminars, and Joris was sitting on stage. And I was just like, Jesus, man, this guy's just full of cool insights about distribution and this and that. Yeah. And I just really enjoy listening to him. And I will certainly not buy OTA Insight because I don't need that. But I would if I had the need.
Needed it.
Yeah. But I think that's one thing that's going to be really interesting with the whole marketplace play of the OTA. Is essentially like, I haven't seen Booking.com and Expedia on these roadshows.
No,
you know, and it's just
they have to actually talk to hotels, and then they get because they get the backlash of the commission, right? So why are you charging us 20% commission? So they are on the one side scared to kind of show up as a cool startup, but they are doing interesting things, and they never join these roadshows, and we are non-stop on the road with all other cool startups. So let's see if they are. This is a call out to Booking.com. Join us, please. Eric, thank you so much for coming to Prague.
Thank you, guys. It was awesome.